to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds.
And for freedom of speech.
Hello, I'm Paul Obatelli and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can email us info@thatalks.com. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, and many other podcast directories out there. Well, hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's been really hectic over the last few weeks, politically, around the world, around Europe, America also. So much going on at the moment, and it's very engaging. Here in the UK, we're going to be soon finding out whether our Houses of Parliament are going to vote against or for Theresa May's so-called Brexit deal. Looking like they're going to vote it down because it is appalling. And then we're going to find out where we go from there, whether we'll go ahead and just leave and work it out ourselves, which is pretty much just Brexit, or if the Remainers are going to really dig their claws in and cause some trouble. I think if you're looking at Paris at the moment, or France rather, and what's going on out there and around Europe, I think that the general feeling with a lot of people is that they just do not believe their governments are serving in their interests. We can talk about the left, we can talk about the right, but the bottom line is the people controlling our countries, whoever they are not doing it in our interests. They're doing it in their own interests, and that's the bottom line. For anyone here, whether you're for Brexit or against it, the bottom line is the people in control, be it in the European Union or in our Houses of Parliament. They're just not listening. They're not listening, and they don't really care. We've also had protesters demonised for being a little bit cocky and too in your face with some of our politicians and journalists, a little bit rough around the edges, but the reaction has been horrific, I think, from the politicians, where we're seeing the arrogance, the sheer arrogance and hatred they have for these sort of classes. Very ugly. I think that's a different side of that ugliness, which the media hasn't really addressed. It's just gone along with the propaganda. Anyway, I'm nattering on. You can already hear how into it I am. I've also spoken to John White I haven't spoken to him for a long time. He's doing great. He's fine. He will come on the show probably late February to update us. He's very busy still with Aslan's army, and with other campaigns going on. He's got a lot to talk to us about. So I just thought I'd say hi from John, and he will be coming on again in a few weeks' time. So we can look forward to that. However, today we're going to be touching again on the Invisible Master conference that's coming up in the 10th of February from 3 till 8 p.m. at St. Peter's Church in Clapham. Now, we've already spoken to Leo Zagami, the man himself, and had a great chat. And then I spoke to Jason Leosatos, really cool conversation we had here. And today we shall speak with Sacha Stone. Now, I'm new to Sacha's work. I've been coming around on the internet and I've been checking out some of his seminars and talks on YouTube, and it's very engaging. I'm really interested, and I've been looking forward to speaking with him. I'm just looking at the biog. I'll read you some parts from the biog. To give you an idea of who he is. He's a former rock musician and the founder of the New Earth Project, a planetary sovereignty, consciousness and sustainability movement, convening itself as the world's first nation of peoples from all cultures and faiths. He established Humanitad as a non-sectarian organisation serving as architect and facilitator of global initiatives impacting sustainability, natural justice, and social ecology. It is a focused platform for experts in economics, media, education, science and technology, research and advocacy, arts and culture, and diplomacy and conflict resolution. And whilst outspoken against the centralization of power and of multilateral institutional manipulation, in order to enter the multilateral arena and attempt to engage with the mechanics of centralized power, Sacha Stone produced the MDG Awards ceremony on the floor of the General Embassy at the United Nations in 2009. It was at this event where Archbishop Desmond Tutu propounded the word Ubuntu, which is fast becoming a major pattern for international socio-ecological reform. So, get a load of that. Yeah, I could read a lot more. It's really interesting, and we're delighted to have him on the show. How are you doing, Sacha?
Greetings, Paul, from Bali in Southeast Asia. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you on. Just to let our listeners know, there is if you do hear a little bit of noise in Sacha's mic, he's got a festival going on where he is at the moment there. We thought we could hear him nice and clearly, so we thought it wasn't a problem. So just to explain what that is, but it's great to have you on, Sacha. I've been checking out some of your work online, some of your seminars and talks, and it's very engaging indeed. Let's start off with, you're speaking at the Invisible Master Conference. We've had Leo on the show, we've had Jason on the show, and now you're here with us. And we're really lucky to have all you guys come on the show, and we're looking forward to the conference. What's your views on the conference then? Are you looking forward to that? What's that all about?
I was never very good at school in Africa in paying attention to what was going to happen the following day at the examination. And I'm afraid I don't know too much about what's going to happen at the conference in London. But I'm heading back for that at the first week of February. So I dare say, well, I'll let you know after the event. But I'm glad to see that that Leo Zagami is taking such a formidable leadership role in repurposing and reorienting the Masonic traditions and the global arterial system that's been set up over many centuries connected to the Masonic orders, because there's a lot of confusion about what it represents. Are all Masons Satanists? Are they all evil extensions of the Templar bankers, or were they, wisdom keepers through the Dark Ages and the Inquisitions? So there's a lot of black and white and this and that connected to the Masonic traditions and the Masonic orders. A lot of information, disinformation, and double disinformation.
Yeah,
and of course it means that both are true variously, and it's good to see that Leo Zagami is taking a leadership role in helping to really qualify and repurpose the Masonic traditions into something that can be purposeful for humanity. For that reason, I was happy to accept the invitation to attend the conference.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll definitely go into more of that as we go along. But to start off with, you're the New Earth Project. You're the founder, Humanitad, and you've got lots of exciting projects going on. How's about just telling us a little bit more about yourself for listeners that are new to your work? A little bit about yourself, what got you into your projects, and where you are now, basically.
Paul, I don't want to go too much into my background story because I've covered it so many times, and I'm in danger of changing it just to stop myself being bored by repetition.
Right,
but
no, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Background: Rhodesian Zimbabwean war, and a rock and roll musician for many years, and a peace activist.
Okay.
I guess you'd call me citizen diplomat, peace activist, and shit stirrer over the last 20 years. But the initiatives and organizations that I've set up are connected to social ecology, citizen diplomacy, and natural justice, and restoration of natural justice. So the International Tribunal for Natural Justice is at the tip of the spear there in terms of challenging the status quo and having an apparatus that we've put together that is capable of apprehending the status quo. And we're doing that, as you may know, with human trafficking and and child sex abuse with some great success this year. And next year we're launching another judicial commission of inquiry into weaponization of the biosphere and healthcare, which will dial it up a bit. But yeah, it's all to do with apprehending the status quo and taking on the systems that have been foisted upon us all since our birth unwittingly. Most of us wake up into the world pretty disgusted with the status quo and recognizing that everything appears to be predicated on war and disease and poverty, and the continuance of war and disease and poverty. Of course, that brings us into banking and into central, in military industrial complex and all the rest of it. So apprehending and challenging that status quo has been my life's mission, and we're deeply invested and involved in that process.
Excellent stuff, yeah. I mean, obviously, as Leo Zagami, we talked a lot about secret societies, the hidden hand, so to speak, and the occult side of what's going on with the powers at the moment. I believe this is something you yourself take very seriously, and I've heard you talk about before. So let's talk about a little bit about the Luciferian control that you believe is going on with us at the moment.
If it was a belief set, it wouldn't be that worrying. It's not a belief set with me. It's based on foundational knowledge and direct experience in some instances. So the Luciferian or false light or ritual satanic aspects of our reality are absolutely real to anyone who is not suffering from cognitive dissonance. And that plays out, as I said, in just observing reality of the basis of our global social ecology and social economy is based on war and disease and poverty, and those three things are engineered. Again, one can prove that out. There are, paper trails and historical contexts which prove that war and disease and poverty are absolutely engineered. They're all by design. They don't happen organically because we're a wicked species running amok on the surface of the earth. That couldn't be further from the truth. Human beings are attuned to their divine nature and into manifesting patterns of perfection in this world when we're not being engineered and screwed and dream spelled into some other context. So that's where the false light and a Luciferian element needs to be recognized, understood, and then apprehended by each of us individually and collectively.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't long ago that our Prime Minister, Theresa May, she wasn't Prime Minister at the time, but she was part of the government, and she was given the job of investigating a paedophile investigation within the Houses of Parliament, because there was so much reports of pedophilia going on. Sure enough, she'd done the investigation. It literally came to nothing. It went on for about 2 years, and then she dropped it, and then she became Prime Minister, and now she's screwing us in other ways at the moment. So it's almost like...
Yeah, well, that was a classic whitewash. Yeah. Everyone who's close to that particular flame knows full well that the Prime Minister appeared to preside over a whitewash exercise there. No surprises. But that's been very much the tradition of the British establishment anyway for many hundreds of years. And let's not forget that Britain is an extension of Babylon, as it were, of Rome, and the Holy Roman Crusades, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican complex, which itself was an extension of the Babylonian enterprise. And, if one understands the geometry and the architecture of the British Empire, it was all based on sacrifice of innocence. That's what the whole colonial enterprise was effectively about. It was going forth under the flag of empire with the sanction of the Pope of Rome under the papal bulls of discovery, allowing us to go forth and maraud and rape and pillage and genocide the brown skin, black skin, yellow skin, and red skin people of the earth. And Britain did a spectacular job of that. It also went forth with the British East India Company and other franchise vessels and effectively carved up or created the global opium trade, drug trade, and trafficking, and which was manifested today into the global pharmaceutical enterprise. So both legal and illegal drugs are really one of the prime exports of the British Crown to the rest of the world. It sounds very shocking. It sounds very irreverent to speak in these terms, but anyone who understands real history and the privateering that really happened within the dominion of the British Empire knows that I'm speaking purely to history.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's always the same story. It seems like that it's always the little people that get blamed for it. We're seeing that now with a lot of the far right, lower class. It's the same old rhetoric that anyone that speaks out against what the government's global plans are for everyone is the real menace and the dark people. Where they're the ones with no power. They're the ones that are having to deal with what these elite groups are doing, and it seems to be still happening today. They always manage to create a witch hunt for the little man.
Well, that's changing, and the deviants, the pedophiles, the traffickers, the idolaters, the Babylonian priesthood, as I prefer to term them as. These are the invisible hand that orchestrate the status quo, and they do so from a very, very centralized perspective. And again, one has to understand the pathology of the emergence of 200-odd nation states in the world, which are all indentured to the central banks within those nation states, and those central banks which control the blood supply of the capacity for people to prosper and survive through the fiat and usurious banking system and banking mechanisms. Those central banks in those 200-odd nation states are centrally owned and controlled by the Bank of International Settlements, and the Bank of International Settlements is itself contained by, variously the IMF, the IFC, the World Bank, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Treasury Department, which filters back to the Crown of England, which is to say the Bank of England, and therefrom to the Vatican Bank and the Jesuitical orders, the nefarious Jesuitical order behind the papacy becomes effectively the Black Papacy, and that is the really command control center of the global financial system. But it's tied into the oversight and the control also of global intelligence. The CIA and MI5, MI6, Mossad, all of the intelligence agencies in the 200-odd nations on Earth are all centrally owned and controlled as well, essentially through various compacts and covenants and treaties, controlled also by the Vatican complex. So the military-industrial complex is a deferral. Its military-industrial complex is the atom seed of the Vatican, and vice versa. And that is the invisible hand, which has been conducting the orchestra again for the last 500 years, essentially, in terms of orchestrating pandemonium, which is the usurious financial systems, and then the engineering of wars, and the fomenting and engineering of wars, and then the dominion of central banking once those wars have been won, by whichever side won, the banks prevail. And that's a very clever game. It goes back also to the Doomsday, 1066 Doomsday book, and understanding how the tabulation, the registration of human souls and of all land on the surface of the earth was also orchestrated and contained effectively through the Vatican apparatus. And going back to 325, in the Council of Nicaea, which is when the flailing Holy Roman Empire reconsolidated itself into the Roman Catholic Church. So the Roman Empire became the Roman Catholic Church and rewrote the narrative connected to the Christian gnosis, and more or less defiled the mystical traditions of the Christian faith and weaponized Christianity. So that could be said to be 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, which led to the weaponization of all faiths off the back of that council, because persecution of the Jews, the persecution of the Mohammedans, the Islam through the Temple and the Crusades, and the murder of the Cathars and Templar Knights themselves, the good Cathars and Templars, the persecution, Inquisition, murder of them as well happened. So the Vatican complex has nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with the mystical traditions of Judaism or Christianity or Islam, which are the three prime faiths, as you know, on Earth today. But that more or less describes the last 2,000 years and the pathology, and how the global intelligence infrastructure or superstructure is directly connected to the nation states and the imposition of nation states as fictions that control the indentureship of the bonded slaves, the wage slaves, which are you and me.
Yeah.
Anyone who's registered at birth and or death to the state or the crown is the indentured bonded slave. You're traded as a fiction.
Yeah.
And your living soul is, in a sense, you're a dead soul, cast adrift. And it's that at the planetary level, when you consider that there are many, many billions of souls who have all been variously indentured into that mythos, it becomes a very serious matter indeed. Because how many of us are dislocated and disconnected from our own divinity, our own capacity to engage our supernature and become abundant, prosperous, beings, pondering our navel, engaging our enlightenment and our genius and our creative expansion. Well, none of us are able to do that in this status quo. We are all of us forced into a survivalist framework where we can simply either fight or flee from a given situation. But it's become untenable in the 21st century, and to the extent that all of us are aware that the whole of history has largely been a con, and we're required now to really clean house individually and collectively and begin to apprehend the myth of power, which is the governments and the churches, effectively, and to recognize that we are the ones that surrendered our power, over many, many millennia, centuries, generations. We were the ones who were surrendering our power to those fictions. We simply need now to awaken within that bad dream, reclaim that status, and engage the flame of sovereignty. And that is what is happening today all around the world, and it's beautiful. And you're right that the status quo will demonize and enmitize people like me, people like you, I guess, those of us who are somewhat awake within the bad dream. We will be enmatized and demonized by the status quo. That's a natural condition of survivalism by a dying status quo. But the franchising of this Fabianist Marxist collectivism and the transgenderification and transhumanization of our species that's going on, and the endemic dream spelling that's going on also through the global academia and media and so on, that all speaks also to the death rattle of a dying Babylonian priesthood, a dying status quo. And so I have to say, in the final analysis, I am profoundly excited and enchanted by today, by what's happening. And I believe that we're entering into a very beautiful chapter of our evolution.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliantly said. And I think that's quite important, because although I think it's quite good that you get a lot of people that are getting much more involved in politics and being much more reacting to injustice going on within the political spectrum, but sometimes you can get a little bit dogmatic with it and too programmed by it itself. And I think it's important to remember, like what you're saying, that at the end of the day, we are going through collective change. And as much as I don't want to sound like the Marxist cliche, like we're all one, there's no borders. in some ways that is true, although that can be used as propaganda to attack something that's created and something that wants to be protected. It can also be true, you know, at the end of the day, we probably are all in the same boat, and a bit of unity can be incredibly powerful. And then we'll worry about differences after we've taken out these whatever they are, you know.
Well, again, the more that humans awaken into our individual and our collective supernature, the more, let's speak in these terms of subtle physics or hyperdimensional physics, the more enlightened you become, Paul, the more you will be literally pumping into the field certain frequencies and codes. Now, that can be proven in a scientific laboratory with thermographic imagery, for instance, kind of Curlian photography. We can demonstrate that when you're thinking in a certain way, in a positive way, in an uplifted way, you are putting frequencies into the field that are affirmative, expansive, creative, life-affirming. When you are in a constricted state, you are doing the opposite. You are drawing life force out of the field into self, and it's a parasitic enterprise, self-defeating, life-depleting enterprise. So my point being that when sufficient humans are out there on the front foot, challenging the status quo, taking on the hologram and manifesting palpable change into that hologram through right action and right thought, and expansive, creative, affirmative actions. That is the stuff that pumps the right kind of frequencies into the field. And when a sufficient threshold is met in the field, it means that this world becomes unlivable or untenable to those that inhabit lower frequencies. That is pure science, and that is how it works. So we need to now not be dream spelled into that constrictive fight and flight survivalist mechanistic state of mind. We need to really transmute that program as a species and move into our creative, affirmative, expansive birthright and strike out. It's what I'm doing. It's what my team are doing. We're taking on Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going out there. Yes, there are death threats. Yes, bullets fly. Yes, horrible things happen from time to time, and it can be dangerous. But it's not the point. Right action is the point. And each of us in our own way, no matter how small and our lives may be, and contained our lives may be, they are all vital. Each of us is vital to this repurposing, and we need to just engage it and do it. And I'm assuming that people listening to your radio show are equal to the values the value set that you speak to and espouse. And so they're going to be people who are equal to this conversation and who will also recognize the need for each of us to become the heroes of our own storyline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that strikes me in this modern world at the moment is we've almost like been brainwashed to think, I mean, we all love peace. Humans love peace. Of course we do. That's natural. But there's a difference between wanting peace because you're afraid to defend yourself than wanting peace because you love peace. There's a meme, I'll read it now, which I think is quite relevant. A student said to his master, "You teach me fighting, but you talk about peace. How do you reconcile the two?" The master replied, "It's better to be a warrior in a garden than to be a gardener in a war." You know what I mean? I think that's quite relevant in that you have to be aware and think sometimes you've got to stand up for things, and that's not always going to be lovey-dovey. You know, sometimes you've got to show a little bit of nastiness to find the peaceful garden, you know, and that's quite relevant. I think at the moment we're in between. Mate, all right, obviously you get some people that go too far and they're you know, what they are, but I think it's that happy medium, and that seems to be the state of affairs at the moment, is finding balance. It's either one extreme or not. You know, you've got to find some balance. You know.
Yes, agreed. Absolutely agreed. I mean, it's. I don't know how you feel and what your perspective is, but I just repeat, I've never felt more enlivened and as though this world is on the threshold of a beautiful evolutionary shift. I'd even call it an upgrade.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've had a few Freemasons on the show, and I mean, they've been pleasant enough. I know there's huge controversy when it comes to Freemasonry and stuff. I've always been of the view that Freemasonry is such a broad movement now, it's very difficult to define actually what it is. But I've heard you speak about it before. What do you think their role in all this is? Do you think it is very bad news, or do you think it's kind of run its course?
I think it's both. I think I understand the question. Look, I would say in the first instance, I would say that the Masonic orders were variously established for the right reasons. Not all, but in the main, it is my sense that the Masonic traditions and orders were set up for absolutely the right reasons, and that was to usher and incubate and steward and guardian the flames of wisdom variously through some pretty dark chapters in history, where being flame keepers and wisdom keepers was a very dangerous business. When the Inquisitions and what have you were going on, you could be hung, drawn, and quartered and burnt at the stake and all sorts of things. So I think that the Masonic traditions began for the right reasons. It is my absolute certainty that they were infiltrated in the main and mostly defiled and repurposed for nefarious ends. And certainly since that son of a bitch of Weishaupt came to bear, coupling with the egregious House of Rothschild and at the genesis of global central banking in the late 1700s, it seems to me that there was a real infiltration of Masonic orders and a negative repurposing of them. I would say that in recent times, it would appear that a number of these orders have cleaned house and are endeavoring to clean house. Most of the Masons that I've met have been Muppets, morons, people who are decent enough people, but who are believe themselves to be changing the world by rolling socks up on the left foot or whatever. And I just found it idiotic. In the United Nations, when I was there doing my Trojan horse bit, some of the leadership of the UN were calling me and talking to me about how they'd just been given their next degree, and they were thrilled. And I was saying, do you have any idea what you're doing, for God's sake? This is just such nonsense. And they didn't seem to have any idea. They'd just been invited into the secret societies, and they were going along with it, believing that it held some great mystical knowledge that would be imparted to them at a certain time. Of course, either it doesn't get imparted to them ever, or they end up being taken into a back room and gulping kitty's blood, or whatever the hell happens at certain levels, which is quite clear that within some of these orders, that kind of nefarious stuff does go on. I happen to know that. But that notwithstanding, I don't demonize Masons, and I refuse to demonize Masons. I think that there are a lot of decent enough people who are Masons, and I think that there's some fiercely intelligent people and good people who are Masons. In fact, some of them I have met a handful, and I'm deeply impressed by their bearing as human beings. So I don't pretend to be an expert at this. I think that there are some very, very good orders and some very shitty orders, like they're very, very good people and very shitty people. But I will say, in final analysis, my opinion is that all of it is moot, and that we're at a point in the 21st century we just don't need or want to be conducting any of our symphonies in cloisters. I don't think it's appropriate at this epoch in our evolution as a species that we should be conducting anything in the basement or using occultic language. I believe it's time for a real heart-centeredness and a transmutation of all of the shadow language, so to speak, civilizationally, a transmutation of that shadow language or shadow alphabet into an emancipated state of fellowship where we engage a new covenant as fellows, which does not involve wearing cloaks and hoods and weird regalia and gathering in basements.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, okay. So if we look at the future now, I mean, we seem to be at a point where people are waking up. We've been talking about that, and that's definitely going on. We can see that going on all around Europe and all around the world. At the same time, we're seeing a more authoritarian hand and measures being built up around us, free speech being attacked, the internet getting more and more controlling. We're in this country. I've lived in the UK all my life, and I'm generally seeing an authoritarian dictatorship slowly work its way up, and it's poking its nose out. Where do you think we go from here? Then, I mean, I'm not assuming that you're the future, but from your opinion, what's your feeling on where we're gonna start going?
Well, that autocratic tiptoe tyranny, as Dave Icke would put it, the autocracy, the despotism, is more desperatism than anything else. It is the death rattle, in my view. I think that when a draconian age comes to its closure, which I believe is happening, its death rattle is going to be pretty ugly. Its death grip is going to be pretty strong. And that's all we're witnessing, in my view, is a death grip and a death rattle. I don't think we need to pay too much attention to the sound of it or the apparent ferocity of it. The truth is that we are becoming increasingly emancipated. The truth of it is that the biosphere is also becoming emancipated and freed up. The so-called climate change and the solar flares and all that stuff that's happening are thoroughly good signs. They are not negative signs. They are not doomsday apocalyptic totems. They are way signs to an upgrade planetarily in terms of the biosphere as well as the social ecology. We are shaking central banking off our backs, and with central banking being shaken off our backs and the emergence of things like blockchain and some of the more healthy aspects of cryptocurrencies, we're going to see a decentralization of centralized multilateral governance as well. A dissolution of the Vatican complex is underway. Dissolution of the United Nations is underway. Dissolution of the European Union is underway. These are all very, very healthy signs that the centralized draconian control element is losing its grip. So, of course, you can expect Britain and France and Germany internally to be going through kind of fitful seizures as the old guard are forced to relinquish. But I have no doubt in my mind that between now and 2023, you won't recognize the political signature of what's going on around the world. I'm a huge fan of what's happening with the Trump administration, more or less. I understand that there are good signs and bad signs that we can speak to, but I can only go by my own experience and by what I know is taking place in the military-industrial basement. And I can safely say that things are being shaken up in a profoundly healthy way in Russia, in China, in North America. And those are the three primary nodes of power. I also know what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa, variously in the Middle East and other parts of the world like Southeast Asia here. Last week I had a visit by the King of Indonesia, the Supreme King of Kings here. I also met with the Director of Intelligence 3 days later, who came for dinner. And I can tell you that these meetings I've had just in the last 10 days in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Don't forget, this is the biggest Muslim population nation in the world. But the things I'm hearing from those who wield and hold power in this country is that these shifts are underway and they are enormous, epic, and that they're going to change the face of the planetary socio-political landscape in the next 2 to 3 years, almost certainly. Yeah. And it's to do with a defanging and a declawing of the fundamentalist Islamism, the so-called Wahhabi agenda, this whole franchising of ISIS and the terrorist cells, which were proliferating in the Middle East and North Africa and in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. Those were heavily financed by elements that were deeply embedded with the Clinton, Obama, Bush cabal, which has itself been declawed and defanged in the last year or two, and increasingly is being defanged and declawed. So the liberal intellectuals who are all quacking on both sides of the Atlantic about how appalling the Trump administration is, and of course they're going to be making those kinds of sounds. Those are the elements that have been the problem all along. But the fact that there is a kind of momentary resurgence of sovereignty and so-called patriotism within countries like Brazil and in North America and in France now with the yellow vest revolution going on, and Britain with Brexit and so on. These are very, very healthy signs that the centralized Babylonian control agenda is in catastrophic failure.
Yeah, no, touching on Trump, I think the thing is with Trump, and I can understand people that are anti-Trump, I can understand they're basically, they sometimes, without, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, I can see that they're being intelligent in spotting the way politicians work, but what they're overlooking is Trump. He has to play that game anyway. You can't be a leader of a country competing with other political spectrums, especially corrupt political groups, and not play the same game as they are. In other words, you've got to trick people because you've still got to win them on. You've still got to, because that's what they're doing. So you need to trick them back and pull them on your side. So
I think you're right. He's having to navigate out of a labyrinth, and you can't navigate out of a labyrinth in a straight line.
That's right.
And so I think that's very, very intelligent what you've just said, and you're entirely correct.
Yeah, and any listeners out there that you may be anti-Trump, think about that, because just look at just what he's doing. Forget about his personnel, what he's like, how much money he's got, and just think about what if he is real and what he's doing, what does he have to do it? Think of the mission it takes. So. But yeah, touching on the yellow vests as well, I mean, that's obviously a positive thing. There's a few concerns in the UK at the moment that it may be infiltrated. I think a rally today in London to, I can't remember the exact what it was actually about, but it was a yellow vest movement that some people feared might have been like that, the same old Antifa groups, in a deliberate attempt to turn it violent, to give it bad publicity. So that might be going on today. That's
bound to happen. That's standard Jesuitical play. I mean, Jesus, just study the Jesuit oath or study the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, and you see that kind of perversion of the art of war. Those tactics are standard Jesuitical play. They will always look at what's happening today and then take the best part of it, infiltrate an aspect of it, or camouflage it, and throw it back into the melee, and then try to destabilize the people by throwing everyone into cognitive dissonance about, is this right or wrong or good or evil? But we just have to expect that. The point is that the yellow vest phenomenon clearly emerged organically. That is almost certain. And what it appears to be doing, just in the last 2 weeks, 60% of the speed cameras in France have been taken out. Well, that to me is a hallmark of a very healthy society beginning to emerge. The very first thing we should do is take down speed cameras and these disgusting eyes in the sky and this perverse police cameras and metadata surveillance going on everywhere. That is the first. Those are the things that should be dealt with day one in any intelligent revolution.
Yeah, no, I have to take my hat off to the French. They're impressing me of what they've done. I did actually say I'm gonna big myself up here a bit. When Macron won their election, I did actually say somewhere on a Facebook group, I'll give it 2 years before there's riots in the streets, and I wasn't too far wrong with that. Having said that, I don't think the yellow vest movement is about violence. I think what people aren't realising is when the police try to shut down a protest, you have a right to be violent back, because that is imposing themselves on your freedom. You should be free to debate.
It becomes a duty of care, exactly, to defend yourself in that situation. That's correct, and people forget that. I mean, as for Macron, I mean, the guy's some perverse, embryo that popped out of some bastard love child of George Soros and Chancellor Merkel. But this creature popped out of the central banking hubbub as a perfect delivery mechanism of global centralized bullshit, and it's been into submission quite early on in his tenure, which is great news. I'm delighted to see that that's taking place.
Okay, we had a little bit of technical issues there. We're back online now. I wanted to touch on the subject of the resurgence of paganism in the West at the moment. I mean, I'm not sure if you're religious yourself at all, but what's your general take on the pagan resurgence in the West at the moment and around the world?
I don't know enough about paganism, Paul, to be able to speak to it with any authority, so I won't bother. I see a resurgence of what I'd call a neo-shamanism emerging, and that is people who are connecting variously with the mystical traditions of their own culture, whatever that is. And if that's paganism, then I'd suggest it's a very, very healthy sign. The deconstruction of organized religion is imperative if we are to engage supernature as a species. And by supernature, I mean to disengage ourselves from the shackles of empire, the shackles of the Roman Catholic Church, the shackles of a perverse military-industrial Vatican-inspired complex, the perversity of global central banking and indentureship to the fiction of governments and states and crowns. Is walking away from orchestrated or organized religion is now the imperative. That is where right action exists. This is going to be difficult for many people who have become somewhat dream-spelled into the mechanisms of their religious persuasion, whatever that is, because we are creatures of habit. And people become very fond of their habits. And where it becomes unhealthy, they become addicted to their habits. But none of that speaks to spirituality or spiritual freedom. So we need to really look inwardly and make those determinations individually. And where we see that we have become coupled to a religion in an unhealthy way, we need to dislocate ourselves from that and return to the mystical traditions of the teachings of the Master Jesus, or the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, or whoever whoever our religious devotion is aimed toward. I would suggest in the final analysis that what is going to become increasingly necessary for people to engage their own flame of divinity is to recognize that we are all sons and daughters of God, and that ultimately we are required to lay down all the idolatry of religion, and it is all idolatry, no matter how you choose to look at it. Crucifixes and prayer beads and stained glass totems, and all of that stuff is totemism. It's idolatrous, and it has been detracting us and taking us away from our own recognition of the divine flame that exists within each of us. So I'd repeat, we are ultimately forced to recognize that we are the sons and daughters of God, and that means that we are one and the same with divine immanence. Now, zealous Christians or Mohammedans, Muslims, are going to suggest that that is the most outrageous claim, and that's Luciferian and satanic, but they would have that reaction. That would be a natural reaction to anyone who is in kindergarten in their own spiritual evolution. And I'm not apologetic by speaking in these terms, because a great many people who hold PhDs and are otherwise intellectually very advanced are absolutely entrapped in spiritual or religious kindergarten. And they are holding fast to the religious idolatry and not to the mystical traditions. And that's a matter for them to wake up to in their own sweet time.
Yeah, no, that's. I just wanted to hear your whole perspective on that, because I really enjoy listening to what you've got to say about all this. It's fascinating stuff. That is just about. We're just about on our time now. Is there anything else you'd like to let our listeners know about? The floor is yours.
No, it's all good, Paul. Thank you. I'm delighted to have had this chat with you, and thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll be very much looking forward to your talk in Clapham on the 10th of February. That's going to be great. There's so much great, really good speakers there and stuff. I'm definitely looking forward to that. I'm sure everyone there is going to have a really good time. I'd like to thank you for giving me your time to come on the show, and please enjoy the remainder of your day or evening over there, I think.
Thank you, Paul. Much love to you. Bye-bye.